Hello, so today we are going to continue on this login page. So last time we did the focus for the different fields and making it work really well with the keyboard. And now our sign-in page itself in the different behavior is working properly. We have the validation. It's working properly with the keyboard. The UI is set up correctly. So right now what we are going to do is implement the sign-in functionality itself. Using your Retrofit, and we'll be using GitHub's API, which means first we have to do a small modification, which is change from email to username, because that's how you sign into GitHub. And then from there, we'll use GitHub API to sign in using, of course, Retrofit, and then also using okhttp. So yeah, let's get started. So the first thing is to change this here from an email address to username. So this is going to be a very quick setup here. So let's just rename this here to be username. Go to email valid, make this check instead for username. And then here, this is going to change to checking username validation, except we will need to change that a little bit because this is going to be actually different. We no longer need @ right? We don't need to enforce @. What we need to enforce is just that it doesn't have like weird characters that GitHub API doesn't accept. So we can do something like we accept all letters, both lowercase and uppercase, as well as all numbers. Then here, this is going to be, of course, a user error message now. And this is, of course, is going to be username. Similar thing here. And this is going to be username. Or we can just input the username and say it's invalid, right? And yeah, so that's pretty much it for this place here. We are going to go to our sign-in screen itself. And just make this be username. Similar thing for the email. Just changing all these to username. And then changing the string here to be, of course, username hint. And making this be username. And we should be good here. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to add the dependencies that we need to be able to implement login with Retrofit. So if we go to here, and then go here, and so what we need to do next is, of course, to set up the different dependencies that we will need. Here, though, let's just update this to a recent version, compose version. What we need is 04. Let's also update this one. And then what we need is, first we need, of course, Retrofit. And we'll use Moshi for library for JSON serialization and deserialization. So we'll need that one as well. And so if we go to our data file, so first we will need Retrofit library itself, and then its converter, Moshi converter. And then we will need for Moshi itself, we'll need these two, Moshi Kotlin and Kotlin CodeGen. And we will need also coroutines to launch requests. After we authenticate, we will need to do requests to get the repositories and that sort of stuff. So we need the coroutines here. Okay, so that should be good. The other thing we will need is for Capt to be able to do generation here. We need to add it to apply the plugin. And now our setup should be good. The next step is that when you sign in, we need to call GitHub API, right? So we'll need to have some sort of a view model, right, to be able to call in into to do the API calls. We don't want to do our API calls in the UI, and we don't want them to be in any class as well. We want something that is retained when you change configuration. So we need a view model. So what this would mean here is that in our main activity, we need to reference a view model. And so to do that, we'll need to create one here. So I'm just going to kind of move this here, call this package signin, and then here create signin view model. Okay. And then for our signin view model, of course, it needs to extend view model from lifecycle library. And we need to just provide a function for signing in. We'll implement what it calls later on, but here we'll need to provide a password and a username to be able to authenticate to GitHub. And then to be able to create the sign-in view model and get a hold of it, of the activity, we need a factory for it. Right now, we don't need a factory for it, but the problem is I will need some sort of something to call GitHub API. And the ideal way to do it is to have some sort of repository that kind of encapsulates where you get the data from. And so here, what we're going to do is create a GitHub repository that we'll fill in later. And then in our view model, we'll need that. So let's define it. And then here we can call sign in the GitHub repository. We'll define that function here. So this needs to be private, of course. And then here we'll just pass in the credentials that we got. And we'll define this one later using Retrofit. Okay, so now that our view model needs a dependency passed in, we have to create a factory class that provides it to the activity or to whatever scope it's used in. And so what we need here is a sign-in, a view model factory. And then this is going to be, of course, extends the view model provider factory, which is just a way for you to implement a function that creates the view model, right? And so this gets passed a model class, and we need to check if this is assignable, whatever we got passed, the class that we got passed, if it sign-in view model can apply to it, right? And if so, we can just return it. So what we do is we check is assignable from assign-in view model class. If it is, then we just instantiate the view model, but we need to pass in a GitHub repository right here. So what I'm going to do for now is just make this an object for now, and then just pass it here. Okay. This will also allow us to test, because we could just mark GitHub repository and just pass it and not need to like call the real class. And there is one problem, is that this doesn't match the type T here. And so we can just extend it. We are already checking and confirming that it's assignable from it. So we should be good there. And then if it's not, then we just need to throw an error. So let's just do that. Like and here let's just do anything, maybe call unknown view model class. And now in our activity, we should be able to get a reference to the view model. Before, the method that used to do this was view model providers, that off. But now you have a property delegate that you can use, which allows you to get the view model in a less verbose way. So I'll just define our view model here. And the property delegate is view models. And if you take a look at this one here, it's it returns a lazy delegate to access the component activities ViewModel. Okay, and what's interesting here is that you can pass to it a factory producer, which is just a lambda that returns something that extends factory, which is ViewModel provided that factory, right? Which is exactly what we implemented in. So this extends ViewModel that factory. And so if we pass that here as the factory producer, just something that returns that factory, that's going to be used to return the ViewModel that we that we initialize here. So whenever you try to get access to this one, it will check if we already created it using the factory, then it will just return it. If we did not, then it will create it from the start and return it to you. And so here what this would mean is that we can just use ViewModel factory. And that should be it. Let's see what we imported here. Okay, so yeah, we imported the correct one. We need to just give it the type of the ViewModel just to get rid of that error, and that works. One thing to note here is that implicitly this ViewModel, because it's on the extension function on the activity, it takes as a scope the ViewModel store of the activity, which means your ViewModel would survive activity configuration changes, right? So that's what we want. And then here, just for the casting, let's just quickly fix it by adding express, because we know that it should work. And now we have the ViewModel that we want. Now, if we go to our activity, the problem is we have the ViewModel, but what we want is when you click on the signing button here, we want to call this sign-in function in the ViewModel, right? And so we need to go to our sign-in screen here. And what you see here is that when you sign in, we call this function. That does nothing, it just logs. So we need to pass that function actually. So we need to pass this as a lambda here so that we can pass it from the activity. And so the way to do this is we can just say that here is just a lambda that gets passed a username and a password and returns nothing. And then we are calling it already here, except we need to rename this to username state, since that's what we are using now. And then this would be called. And now we need to pass this in the main activity. So if we go back, we need to pass that here to sign in screen. So that would be pretty much just passing the lambda here. So take the ViewModel and just call sign in. So here we will get, in our lambda, we will get two things. Let me just grab them from here. We'll get username and password. And so what we can do is just use that and pass it. Okay. And now that we have everything set up on the ViewModel side, we will just first log this just to make sure that everything is working. Maybe we can just log the username, not the password, of course, and then just say this is test, right? Okay, so now that it's running, let's test out so far the implementation. We just want to make sure that that our ViewModel sign in here, that it logs this. So we just want to make sure that it's working. So let's just filter for username, and let's add some credentials for for a throwaway account that I added. We have one problem here, which is the validation. We need to adjust it a little bit. So right now, if I look at the validation we have in username state, the pattern that it accepts is lowercase letters, definitely. And then we didn't specify like the length. So let's say our password needs the length of at least 3 and up to 15, and then just end it at that, right? So let's try again. And now if we input that account, and then let's take a look at what we have here in the logs. Yeah, so username, and then we can see, yeah, we can see the username and test printed. So we should be good. Now the next piece is to implement the, to define our GitHub, our Retrofit interface with the URL and then the JSON model, and then call it directly. And so here I'll just make this a class. There is no reason for it to be an object here. And then pass that an instantiated instance. And then now after this, what we need to do is we need to define here, we need to instantiate some GitHub API, right? And so I'm going to define an API provider where we can create a GitHub API instance by passing a username and a password. And so here what this would mean is, let's just save it. Once it's instantiated, the goal of this is it's instantiated with a username and a password. We will keep hold of it and reuse it. And so this is going to be GitHub API, and let's just make it nullable until it gets instantiated. And then we need to define our GitHub API here. So to do that, we need to create an interface. Let's call maybe this package data. And we need to have an interface called GitHub API. And this would be let's call it get user repos, just something basically to fetch the public repositories of a user. This will allow us to make sure that our GitHub authentication worked. And so this is going to be just a get. And this, you can get this just from GitHub documentation, which is just for a username, we want to get the repos, and we want to get 100 per page, so 100 at a time. And what we need to pass is, of course, the username. So path is this here is the username that we need to pass. This, and then this is going to be a username, which is a string, right? It's going to be like this, and we get a list of repositories, right? And so we need to define a data class here for repository, and the two fields that we are interested in from the JSON response is the ID and the name. And let's just, for Mashi to work properly, let's just call JSON adapter generate adapter equals true. Okay. Now that we have our GitHub API, we need to define, let's import it first and then define a GitHub API provider. What this would be for us is just a way to set up the authentication mechanism. So again, let's make this an object here just to get it going. And then we want to create a new API using a username and Or actually, it will be simpler to just say import it here and then just create a function. And then we guarantee that we will pass return one. And then what we need here is we need to set up authentication. Right? We have a username and a password. The simplest authentication we can use here is what's called basic authentication, which would mean just we pass, we create an authorization token using just this format, which is going to be just the word basic. So this is basic authentication, where you can just pass in a concatenation of the username and password, and that's all you need essentially. So it's pretty simple. So what we need is kind of take the username and password like this. Except we don't want to pass them like as they are. Both they would be readable to the eye. But the other thing, most importantly, is that the user may include in password some non ASCII character, right? And the thing is, on this would be the authorization header for our requests, and those allow only ASCII characters. So we need to convert this portion here to make sure, just make sure that it's an ASCII character. So to do that, we just use base64 and encode it before sending it. So that's the main part here. And so let's just return. Let's set up, our HTTP client. Okay, HTTP client, and then we'll set up the authorization header to be, so this would be base64.encode. This is just like a pseudocode of it, and then send it over the wire. One thing, if you want to understand this properly, one thing you can read on is character sets and character encoding, right? So we have the character sets, which are the characters themselves, and then we have the encoding. Here for our HTTP header, we want to ensure that the encoding is ASCII, or at least extended ASCII, and so we need to use this to make sure that that it just follows that format regardless of what the user passed in. On the security side, although like if we encode it with base64, it would be not very readable to the eye. It's easily decodable, so that's not secure. To ensure that it's more secure here, we'll use HTTPS for GitHub API, so that would be API github.com. Just keep this in mind. And here we'll need to create our HTTP client, and then create a builder, and then add the interceptor here. And so this is just the usual way you create an interceptor with HTTP, so that it intercepts every request. What we want is that for every request, we want to add this authorization token, right? And so what we are going to do here is get the original request. So this would be just chain.request, okay? And then we will modify it. So using a new builder, new request builder, and then we'll add a header. And the header that we are going to add is authorization, of course, right? Just like if you are using Postman, you would do authorization to point authorization as the field, and then you would do basic, and then you will follow it with this, right? And so that's exactly what we are going to pass here, auth token. Okay, and now we can define our auth token here using the format that I mentioned here. So it's going to be basic, of course, with space, because we are using this authentication here, and then we'll encode it, as I said, in base64, encode to string, and then we can, basic authentication says you can just pass in the username, password. We of course need to convert it to byte array. So let's just do like this. So byte array, and so let's just make this like credentials, call this credentials here. and then pass them. And then we can pass another thing here, which is flags for base64. We'll just use no wrap here, which just means that it will emit all line terminators. So the input would be just one line long. And we kind of have this, we kind of know that this would be the case because our username and password will not contain like a new line. Okay, so now that we have this, actually we can get rid of this. So it's just username and password. So we have our authorization token. Now we'll just pass it here. And then we have the builder, right? And so we'll create a request using that new request builder. And so just build, that will give us a new request. And then we can just use chain and say proceed with this new modified request. The other thing we need to include in the header here is what's the media type we accept. And the thing here is that GitHub has its own media type that it provides you with. And so let's just pass that, accept. And the one we want is application. So if you go to GitHub API, I'll show that in a second. v3 plus JSON. So basically GitHub API allows you to pass its own media type. And what this format here would mean is that we want a JSON, of course, back, and we want v3 of the API version 3. So this is what's nice here is that using this thing with media type, you can kind of version your API even, right? And yeah, so just looking at GitHub documentation, you will find the different media type available. And I'm just going to go with v3 and JSON here. And now that we get the okhttp builder, we attach our interceptor, right? All our interceptor does is add these two headers for every request. So every request will pass through this interceptor, and then we'll add these two headers. Because for our request, we want them authenticated, so we need to add this. And then we can build and get to okhttp client. And from the okhttp client, we can now create our retrofit instance. Okay. And so let's remove this. We set up our authentication. The only thing that we'll still need is the GitHub API. We'll pass that to Retrofit. So let's just take this here. And so to create Retrofit, we can just say this would be using Retrofit Builder, of course. And of course, we need to pass the base URL. And as we said, we need it to be HTTPS. And then we can attach the okhttp client. We want this modified version that has this interceptor that adds these headers. And since we said that we will use Moshi for serialization, if we look at our GitHub API to serialize and deserialize this repo response, so what we need here is to add a converter factory for Moshi. And so we just do create and build it, and then we can just create an instance now of our GitHub API. The usual way you do with Retrofit, which is retrofit.create, and then you need to pass your GitHub API. And that should be it. So just to recap what we did here, we get past the username and password. We create an authorization token using basic authentication for it. So we just take the concatenation using a colon here for username and password, encode it, and then prefix it with basic, and then pass that as the header as the authorization header. And then we specify the media type we want. And then we create our okhttp client that adds these two headers for every request. And then we create our retrofit instance that uses the okhttp client and uses Moshi, and then we create an instance of our GitHub interface. So far so good. Now if we go back to our GitHub repository, We get an instance of GitHub API, so we should be good now. It should be authenticated and all. But just to confirm that it's really authenticated, we need to call something. We need to try to get a private resource and see if it works, right? And so to do that, what we are going to do is just call get user repositories here. If it returns us the correct value, then it means we should be good, and we can like maybe display the list of repositories in the next screen, right? So here we pass the username, of course, but this is a suspend function, right? Which means we need to run it in a coroutine scope. And so what we do here is, let's just do coroutine scope and make sure this is on IO because it's a network request. And we can launch and then launch this. And now, so this is, of course, it needs to be this. This will give us the list of repositories. But just to make sure it works, let's just log the repository size. I created the account that I created that I'm logging in with right now has just one repository, so we'd expect the size to just return one. Okay. And in addition to that, I'll just print the name of the repository just to make this super clear. So this would be repo it dot name. Okay. Repo ID. Okay. And now let's just run this and see if it will work. Okay, so we are expecting to see this in logcat. So now what we are expecting is something with repo. And so let's try to log in here. It crashed, which I suspect is because we didn't add the internet permissions, network permissions in our manifest. Yep, exactly. So we need, since we are doing a network call, we need in our Android manifest here to specify that it uses internet permission. Okay, so let's run this one more time. Okay, so we have account. And let's see our logs if we got something useful. Okay, so size is 1, and then the ID is this, and then more importantly the name. This is the exact test repo that I created for this account. So that means we were able to authenticate correctly. Our API is working now correctly. So yeah, we should be good to go to display these repositories in another screen, or maybe call another GitHub API endpoint and display the result. But authentication is working fine now. And so yeah, that will be in next episodes, in the next videos. But to summarize what we did today, basically created a ViewModel and attached that to the active main activity. And when you sign in by clicking on the button or pressing enter, we call this signing function, which just is a callback here that calls the ViewModel, and then ViewModel calls our repository. And then our repository instantiate GitHub API using username and password. Basically, it creates okhttp instance, retrofit instance using the right authorization header. And then after that, we just can call our API and we are authenticated correctly. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching and see you on the next one. Bye.